Hello, ready to start this second lesson in the series. I hope that you saw the first lesson. My name is Richard Lee, and this is going to be a series of lessons dealing with defending the Christian worldview against all other worldviews. We're going to use a process known as presuppositional apologetics, which I defined in the first video. And this video is sort of like the movies. I don't know if you remember Star Wars, or if you're a big Star Wars fan, but the very first episode of Star Wars was episode 4, I believe. Then they did 4, 5, and 6. And then they went back and did 1, 2, and 3, and I'm not exactly sure where they are now. It seems like they've done a gazillion Star Wars movies, but they started with episode 4, and then they went to the prequels. So that's what I'm going to do here. This lecture here is going to be dealing with defining worldviews. But before I actually give a definition, I'm going to read some Bible verses and talk about some things that should be at the forefront of the Christian's worldview, and they should be at the forefront of the Christian's presuppositions. Now, if you're not a Christian, you're definitely not going to agree with these, but that's okay, because it's going to be my goal through this series of videos to reduce all other worldviews to absurdity, and that's what they are. So we're going to talk about facts and faith. Not in this lesson. In the next lesson, I'm going to go in and talk about facts and what they are, and faith and what it is, and how faith is really founded on the rock. Faith is founded upon substance, and not, as some people believe, it's founded on nothing. But what you're going to find out is that other people's faith are really founded on nothing. But I want to ask a series of questions to begin with. Again, I want to ask you, how does the Bible, and this is for the Christian, how does the Bible fit into your worldview? What do you talk to your family about? What do you talk to your friends about, and your co-workers and associates? Now, I recognize that on the job, you want to talk to your co-workers about things pertaining to business. But if you're like most people, you'll take lunch breaks with your co-workers, and 15-minute breaks usually in the morning and in the afternoon. And sometimes you may even see some of your coworkers after work, at a cocktail party or whatever. And what do you talk to those coworkers about? What do you talk to your associates about? And more importantly, your good friends, your very good friends, and your family members. What do you talk to them about? Well, I'm going to begin with some Bible verses, and these are some things that you should be talking to them about. And I'm going to start at the beginning. And the Bible verses for this second lesson in this series is going to all be dealing with what took place in the beginning. Because from a Christian perspective, This material world did have a beginning. Now, God doesn't have a beginning. God has no beginning at all. He was from everlasting to everlasting. First verse that I'm going to read is the very first verse in the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Again, God has no beginning. That's the beginning of this material world. Now, I better do this now before I forget, but in the next lecture when I talk about facts, I really want to emphasize some things. Like, for example, in this verse, the word God, which is in the Hebrew is Elohim. Well, Elohim is in a plural format. That's a fact. No one can dispute it. Anyone that knows anything about Hebrew grammar at all, and I'm not an expert on Hebrew grammar, but anyone that knows anything about it will tell you that this word God is in the plural form. And the verb bara, which is translated as created in this first verse, is in a singular form. Now, that's unusual, and I'm not going to go into the interpretation of that. I'll leave that for you to do, or I may talk about it a little bit in other lessons, but the thing that I wanted to point out is those grammatical constructs are indisputed facts. But we see from this verse that there was a beginning. Now, I want to turn to the New Testament, the Gospel of John. We're going to read something about the beginning in the very first chapter of the book of John. I'm going to read chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. And it says, "In the beginning was the Word." And I tell you that that word, that logos, was there. And the Word, that logos, was with God. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now, you could really look at that and think about that. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Now I'm going to skip down to verse 14 of this first chapter, and it reads, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw His glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and full of truth." That tells you that eyewitnesses saw this logos that became flesh, and they testified about it. John in this gospel testifies about it. So we've got the witnesses of men. Not only John, but people such as Peter and Paul and the Lord's brother James. We have many, many witnesses that's going to testify about the glory that they saw. And every one of them didn't see exactly the same thing, but we got eyewitness testimony. Now the Muslim can attest to that, and the Muslim is going to have a problem with saying that the Logos became flesh and that the Logos was there at the beginning. But again, we're going to reduce Islam to absurdity. That's going to be my goal, but we're not going to do it in this lesson, so I hope you'll stick with me. Now let's go to the book of 1 John, written by this same apostle, which we sometimes call disciples, a student. He was a student of Christ. And since there is a 1 John, we'd have to assume that there's a 2 John, and for you Christian Bible scholars, you would know that there is also a 3 John. And you also know that this same apostle that wrote the Gospel of John and the epistles of John also wrote the book of Revelation. So we begin to see that John, who is this eyewitness, is going to testify. So what does he say in the book of 1 John, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3? He says, what was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life. Now, for you empiricists out there, and I'm going to talk about empiricism as we go, that's what was experienced through the senses. Again, John is telling you about what he heard, what he saw, and what he touched. He was an eyewitness. Now this was concerning the word of life. And the life was manifested. It was made known. And we have seen and testify and proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and manifested to us. It was made known to them. What we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you also, so that you too may have fellowship with us. Indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. Again, stop and think about this word son. It's not talking about a son in the sense that we everyday people get together and have children. You know, through a relationship of man and woman getting together. Christ is not the son in that sense. And again, the purpose of this lesson is not to write down all of the intricate details of the Bible, but God the Father doesn't have a wife in the same sense that I have a wife. So it's not talking about sonship in that sense. Matter of fact, the Bible will tell you that Jesus is the only begotten. He's unique. So he's not a son in the sense as we would think of regular sonship in the flesh. Now I want to go back to the Old Testament and read from the book of Proverbs, starting at chapter 3, verse 19. Well, I'm only going to read that one verse, and then we're going to go to some other verses in the Proverbs. But Proverbs chapter 3, verse 19 reads, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens." You see, we see that wisdom, intelligence was there at the beginning. And this next verse is going to substantiate that more. Proverbs chapter 8, verses 22 through 29. Now, I'm not going to read the first 21 verses. If you go back and read from Proverbs chapter 8, you're going to see that it's talking about wisdom. It says, "The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before his works of old. From everlasting I was established. From the beginning, from the earliest times of the earth, when there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water, before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. While he had not yet made the earth and the fields, nor the first dust of the world, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he inscribed a circle on the face of the deep, when he made from the skies above, when the springs of the deep became fixed, when he set for the sea its boundary so that the water would not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth." You see, the atheist should have a problem with all of this. And we want to reduce atheism to absurdity also. You see, one of the atheist's presuppositions, and excuse me, got something on my forehead there. But one of the presuppositions of the atheist is this, that this just happened by chance. Some of them believe that there was a particle known as the Higgs boson particle, and that it just exploded and blew up, and after up 10 billion years, we got to where we are. Now, I said up 10 billion. I think they talk about 4.5 billion or something. The number doesn't really matter to me. The point is that the atheist says that there was no wisdom and that it just happened. And if there was no wisdom, then it would have had to have happened by chance. There was no plan. Now, there's a third point of view, and again, we're not going to get into that right now, which which gets down to, well, maybe aliens put everything that we see here, maybe the aliens did it. Well, I didn't talk about that in the last video in the outline, but I think that I may need to address that one later on too. Should address that along with atheism. In this last verse that I want to read is again for you Christians, and it should be at the forefront of your presuppositions and worldview. It says, Proverbs 1, verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." You see, fools don't want to listen to the God that created everything in the beginning. It says they despise wisdom and they despise instruction. Now, this word I didn't look, but typically in the Bible, the law, Torah, is translated as instruction. I'm not sure if that's the case in this verse here, and I'm not going to go back to look and see. Again, as a Christian, that could be one of the things that you might want to explore and see what Hebrew word was actually used here for instruction. Now, what I want to do is read a definition of a worldview. And that is the crux of this lesson here, defining the worldview. And I'm going to be very slow and meticulous. Some people might look and say, well, you're slow and meticulous anyway. You don't do anything quickly. Well, I try to be thoughtful and slow and meticulous. And you see, I'm smiling here. And I do have a sense of humor. And, you know, I was told by people that I love very much, don't focus so much on your sense of humor. Be yourself. Well, this is me. And I do have a sense of humor. Can you see a smile? A worldview is a network of presuppositions. It's not one. They come in groups. So it's a network of presuppositions which are not verified by procedures of natural science regarding, now the atheist is definitely going to have a problem with that definition, because they're going to want to verify everything through natural science. Well, you want to see that there's some things that they can't verify through natural science. Let me continue to read the definition and I'll comment more on that. But it's regarding epistemology. That's knowledge. How do you know what you know? Everybody talks about what they know at some point in time and what they don't know at some point in time. Well, there's a whole school in philosophy dealing with how do you know what you know, and that's called epistemology. And then the second bullet regarding this worldview deals with metaphysics, what's real and what's not real, and ontology, that is the nature of being. And the third leg that we're going to really emphasize is ethics. Now, for you atheists, again, how do you come up with a method with dealing with ethics from the point of view of natural science? But I know that you atheists and everybody else at some point in time thinks about what's right and what's wrong. Well, again, we're not really talking about atheism right now, but you atheists don't have a standard. No way whatsoever to determine what's right or wrong, what's moral and what's not moral. So again, every element, I want to stress that every element of human experience is related and interpreted. Now, we listed three major things, but this relates to how you do your politics, you know, what's in terms of who you're going to vote for and why you're going to vote for this individual. Well, that has to come into play in your worldview. And what do you think about people in general? We call that your philosophy of man, of mankind. That has to come into play. So everything has to come into play. So I just mentioned, I'm going to reiterate, why are these presuppositions not verified by natural science? Well, Again, we're going to be dealing with our very, very basic convictions. For example, what do you do when a loved one dies? Especially if that loved one is a young child. Maybe, you got married and decided to have a family, and you had a baby, and then you find out very early on that this child has some disease, and the doctors doesn't have a cure for it, the disease, and the child passes away. You atheists, why do you mourn? Again, if everything happened through a Big Bang and the Higgs boson particle blew up, now, again, I want to comment, I don't know exactly how the Lord created the earth. As a matter of fact, if you go to the book of Job, I think around chapter 38, he asked Job some of those questions about the creation. Like, where were you? But you see, from this book of Job, you begin to get some answers to some of these tough questions. So, your baby dies, but in a random chance universe, why do you mourn? Things just happen the way they do. And when we deal with atheism, I'm really going to hit this hard. But I can say the same thing or similar thing for Hindus with their many gods. I believe Hindus have over 300 million gods, and not every Hindu worships every god. But one of the major tenets, I think, for many Hindus, maybe not all, is that we're really just living in a world of illusion, that there really is no material world. And so when you lose your wife or you lose your husband, as a matter of fact, I think they take some of the Hindu women and put them on the fire when the husband dies first. I definitely wouldn't want to go through that. But I don't get off the subject. Here we're dealing with morality, but mourning, even more specifically. If everything is an illusion, then why do you mourn? Your loved one that just died was just an illusion. They weren't real. So why do you mourn? And the Buddhists, I don't want to leave you out. If you're following the teachings of Siddhartha and you're taught not to desire anything, well, why you desire to see your loved one again? Why you desire to be with them again? Or maybe you don't. I don't know. Maybe you don't mourn. Maybe you're a real good Buddhist and you don't mourn at all. My experience tells me that if there's someone that you really care about and something happens to them, that you mourn. But mourning from the perspective of the three that I just mentioned makes no sense at all. I want to say one other thing, and then I'm going to stop this video. You see, this one is a lot shorter than the first one, but everything that I mentioned in the first one that needed to be there. But if you start from assumptions that you don't share, and believe me, you can see that the atheist, the Hindu, the Buddhist, and the Mormon, we're all starting from different assumptions. What I'm saying is, for the Christian, especially for the Christian that wants to go out and share the gospel and be ready to give an answer for the hope that's in you. Some things that we really talked about in that first lesson. If you start from assumptions that you don't agree with, the argument will never end. Well, people might say, well, look, wait a minute. I'm not going to argue with you. As a matter of fact, one of the things, as they say, is, when you're at the Thanksgiving dinner table, or, when you're having your dinner, talk about everything but politics and religion. Well, I'll talk about politics and religion. So it's good for you to know what your assumptions are. As I mentioned on the last video, I would love to receive comments. You can send me comments at the email address that's on the screen, and I'll do my best to answer each and every one of them. As I said the last time, if I receive 1 million, I'm not going to be able to answer each and every one of them, but I will do my best. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next one.